intense, ain't it? Hey, and welcome to Making. Radar in movies was always used to create these wonderfully dramatic scenes where the hunted never quite knows where the hunters are. The history of the development of radar during World War II is fascinating, not least because of the disinformation efforts the British went to hide the technology. And the Ministry for Information spread the rumour that carrots help you see in the dark, to explain how the Allies always seem to know the location of the incoming air raids. Old school radar, of course, was an analogue technology, using an oscilloscope to display return signals. In essence, a beam of electrons was fired directly at the screen, no scanning across and up and down like a CRT TV. Electromagnets tuned to the radar receivers deflected the beam to the points on the display. Rather than sending out a signal in all directions, the radar beam was broadcast as a more powerful rotating beam, and when it bounced back from an object, such as an enemy aircraft, the returning beam was detected, its relative weakness measured, and the display focuses the electron beam at the corresponding point. The screens were coated in a fluorescent material that continued to glow after being hit, slowly fading out. The big weakness of radar is that it doesn't detect movement. So when an object appears, you have to wait until the beam hits it again to work out its heading. Which is why it's such a cool plot device. In this video, I'm going to take you through the steps to create your own display. You'll only need After Effects, and I'll be taking advantage of the new, super cool Track Matte Select feature. Once we're done setting everything up, I'll then run through a couple of options for controlling the movement of the incoming blips. It's a fair bet that no matter what film project you're working on, at some point after creating the big explosions, laser beams, there'll be a note in the script asking for a CG display. One thing that's quite often important for realism on these fake displays is understanding time and how that works. So this is actually part one of a mini series about faking displays. I'll also be faking an air traffic control screen and a Doppler weather radar screen. In all three cases, I'll use a different method for setting the time. Okay, that's more than enough waffle, let's jump into After Effects. And I'm using a 1080p comp, even though the final display will be round, as if you want to use corner pin generated by Mocha AE, that requires the replacement screen to be the same resolution as the parent comp. Make a new solid by going to Layer, New, Solid. And I'm leaving this to be comp sized. But I might colour it green and hit enter and rename this to Sweep. This is going to be our rotating beam. Now go to Effect, Generate, Gradient Ramp, and set the start of the ramp's position to be 120 and 500. And the end ramp's position to be 0 and 500. So we get this band of white fading out. Now go to Effect, Distort, Polar Coordinates. Change the type to Rect to Polar and max out the interpolation. And that's a huge amount of the work done already. One cute thing you can do when using this method is that if I now adjust the Y position on the gradient ramp's start of ramp, I can create a little bit of lag in the upper section of the beam. Now go to Effect, Stylize, Glow. And set the radius to 20 but drop the amount to 0.2. So we get this more intense beam. Now let's add a tint effect by going to Effect, Color Correction, Tint. And set the map white 2 to a lightish green. I went with 00FFA2. And now to make it rotate. I initially just rotated the layer, but instead I'm going to go to Effect, Distort, Transform, which reads as an effect instead. And normally at this point I'd hold Alt and click on the rotation stopwatch and add a time expression. But let's mix it up a little, which will also give us more control. Set a keyframe for the rotation, and then move ahead in the timeline to about 1 second and set a new keyframe, this time with a value of 1 for 1 complete rotation. Now hold Alt and click on the stopwatch. And by using the Tiny Expressions library, go to Property, Loop Out Cycle. In the expressions area, change the number of keyframes to 2, and previewing the result, you can see the animation continues to loop, although in this case it's going a bit too fast. So all I have to do is move the keyframes further apart until it feels right. Now, while this works well for a visual pickup, we'll want any pings detected to remain on screen much longer. So, making sure the layer is selected, go to Edit, Duplicate, and rename this layer to Sweep Matte. In this layer you can delete the glow and tint effects, and tap U to expose the rotation keyframes, and do the same for the original sweep layer too, if they're not already visible. And then use the rotation pick whip to link the matte's rotation values to the originals, so that we only have one set of keyframes to adjust ever. On the matte's gradient ramp, adjust the start of ramp's X value to set it to be something like half the width of the solid, 960. In a moment we'll be using this layer as a matte, so with the ramp visible for about half the circle, we'll get the blip on screen longer. So now let's make that blip. Create a new solid, whatever size you want, and rename it to blip. And then go to Effect, Generate Circle. I could draw a circular mask instead, or even use a shape layer, but I like the control I get with circle. Set the radius to be small. I went with 8. And then add a glow effect. Set the radius to about double the circle's radius, so 16, and set the intensity to 5. And then I set Composite Original to None. This gave me a slightly softer shape. And changed the glow colours to A and B colours, and set Colour A to that same green that we used on the tint, 00FFA2. And then just move the layer's position off from the centre point, and unsolo everything. Now to see what we're doing, turn off the visibility of the matte layer. Now here's a quick story about the importance of not getting caught up in trying to use expressions to solve everything. I was originally planning on using sample image, which is a really clever expression that is in effect an alpha matte detector, so like calculating a track matte. And I was then going to use a really neat expression Dan Ebbets helped me write, which used the blip's opacity to determine when it could move. The problem was, even when it was working, it was making the animation changes really difficult, as After Effects was constantly trying to run the expression when I was tweaking the movement. In the end, I abandoned the approach and went with something much easier. Firstly, animate your blip using keyframes on the position property, and then using the new track matte selector, select the Sweep Matte layer, and then click on the little icon to select Luma Matte. Now scrub through the timeline until the blip appears, and click the keyframe diamond marker to set a keyframe. It's not a bad idea to set it just before the sweeping line hits it. If in doubt, use the page up key to go back one frame. Now once you have all your keyframes set, select them all in the timeline, and right click and choose Toggle Hold Keyframe. On the face of it, this is a massive pain to do it this way, but you'll have to trust me, I spent many more hours trying to automate this than I did manually setting the keyframes. And if you want to show your appreciation for all the time I've spent making myself miserable on your behalf, you could always click the like button and possibly hit subscribe. Apparently there's a super thanks in YouTube too, but I've no idea how that works. Feels like something for people doing Twitch streams. The rest of the display is really just set dressing. Using a shape layer in the ellipse tool, I drew a circle, holding down Shift and Control to set its shape and position, and deleting the fill. Once I had one, I duplicated this circle, increasing the radius by 200 pixels. And repeated until the whole area is filled. These are the mile markers. Next, I drew a rectangular path on the same layer, but expanded the properties to set its size to 1000 by 0. And then use the repeater option to make 8 rotational copies. At 45 degrees to each other. But everything was looking a little too clean, so I added a fractal noise effect to the shape layer. The metal plate is a stock image of metal with more shape layers behind the sweep layer to add some structures. Likewise, there's a dirty glass texture over everything, and an adjustment layer with CC lens to add a subtle distortion. The multiple blips use CC ball action to make all the dots for me. The entire project is in the description below, feel free to use it to see all the settings involved. If you do use this in one of your projects, please post a link below, I'd love to see it in action.